I want to welcome you to our annual meeting. I guess this is our first annual meeting in our new building. I want to point out that we have emergency exits. That door there where you came in, and if you go through
Out this way.
out that way, there's another emergency exit. We're going to keep track of attendance, so there are some sheets being passed for you to sign.
Anyone have a sign what was on
If
the
you
back?
care to, you can put your email address. That way, we will keep you informed of what's going on. We have emails probably once or twice a month, and then program notifications, also if you're interested in volunteering. We have an order of business we need to take care of, and that is to vote on the slate of officers for 2024. The nominating committee has suggested the following: President Dorothy Wiggins, Vice President Andrea Fitzgerald, Treasurer Sandra Roberts, Secretary Marcy Zahari, Archivist Dorothy Wiggins, and Historian Andrea Fitzgerald. So I'd like a motion to accept the slate of officers.
I motion to accept.
Is there a second?
A second.
Okay, is there any discussion? Are there any nominations from the floor? We will have a vote then. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Very good. That will be our slate of officers for 2024. I want to invite our volunteer coordinator, Marcy Zahari, come forward.
Thank you, Jack. When the museum opened in June, the officers agreed that we would be open to the public Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday from 10 to 2. In order to do so, we have to rely on the generosity of the local community to come in to volunteer, to staff the museum, to work on different projects, and just learn about the local history, which has been so much fun since we've opened. And I'm happy to report we have 11 volunteers, and tonight we wanted to just give them a certificate of appreciation, which they can pick up on the way out, because we're a little rushed on time, and I want to make sure we get our program in. So I'm just going to read off the names so you know who's been here to staff the museum over the last 6 months. If you're here, raise your hand. If you're not, well, Betsy Babcock, Bev Betancourt, Mike Betancourt, Barbara Ann Craig, Cindy DeRoja, Carl Hertig, Beth Johnson, Jean McGregor, Jim McGregor, Karen Rumline, and Paula Wright. Your dedication has been instrumental in making our museum such a success. We really appreciate it. And while we rely on all of the volunteers to help staff the museum, there's been one volunteer in particular that the board unanimously voted as the Volunteer of the Year, and that is Jim McGregor. Since we opened, he's been here once to twice a week, donating his time 20 to 40 hours a month. And the times I've been here, when Jim has staffed the museum, I have found out he is a local from Lisbon from way back when, his father having a doctor practice right on Main Street, and he has lots of stories to tell. So if you want to come down and check out the museum when Jim's here, I'm sure he will appreciate you listening to all of his stories. And for those of you who are interested in volunteering at the museum, if you go to our website, you'll see a big hand on there. You click on the hand and you sign up for a couple of hours. They're in 2-hour blocks, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday, and we welcome you. Just show up at the time. Back to you, Deb.
Okay. one more a piece of business before we have our program, and that is that we have been honored by the North Country Council as the best new attraction of the year. And I want to welcome Nick Tanaga here this evening.
Thank you. Should I stand there?
Sure. Up and over
A lot
here.
of stuff going on, so I'm actually here on behalf, just don't want to correct you, Don, but the secretary of the Byways Council was very specific in that. So I'm here on behalf of the North Country Scenic Byways Council. That group helps manage kind of and oversee the over 600 miles of scenic, cultural, and historic byways throughout the North Country region. And so this is one of our byway enhancement awards that the council has kind of given out over the past few years, just for, we've given them to groups that have undertaken projects that are important, to preserve and kind of rehabilitate cultural, historic attractions and kind of locations along our byways throughout the area. So in 2023, as you kind of mentioned, is that the Byways Council has bestowed the newest attraction award to the Historical Society for rehabilitating this wonderful building. And this comes with a donation of $1,000 from our secretary of the Byways Council. And it's pretty clear having walked in, seeing the incredible work that's been done here. So yeah, I'm honored to present this to you.
Thank you very
And
much.
it's well worth it.
Thank you. As you can imagine, we've put a lot of work and a lot of time into this effort, so it's great to be recognized. At this time, I want to introduce our speaker and for our special program, Tim Lewis, author, educator, journalist, broadcast correspondent, producer, and cogger. And I'm sure that he will elaborate on that. He will talk about the Mount Washington Cog Railway. Tim?
All right, welcome to a research project that's been going on now since May of 2015. My dad was asked by Colonel Arthur Teague to write an operating manual for the Mount Washington Cog Railway. He was asked in 1962. It was supposed to be published in 1964 so the tourists could understand what was going on behind them in that steam engine. In May of 2015, I said, Dad, we've got to finish that project because you're not going to be on the planet much longer. And he grudgingly agreed to finish his portion of the project, but only if I included my first journalistic effort, which was a weekly employee newsletter called the Cog Clatter that I published on a mimeograph machine in 1966 and 1967. Dad finished his portion before he decided to power down. But by then, I'd gotten stuck. And so you are going to suffer through. I mean, you are going to hear what I've been up to, and specifically, you're going to hear about how Lisbon played into the Mount Washington Cog Railway history. So here's hoping all the technology works. Once upon a time, there was a farm boy from a 10-cow staged starvation farm in Lunenburg. Yep, it's going real well so far. There it is. He had a college roommate who got him a summer job at the Cog Railway, where veteran engineer Mike Boyce trained him to be an engineer. Back at school, our boy, met a girl. They got married, they had a kid. Most of the Cog crew never knew what their names were. They were just known as Jimmy, Mrs. Jimmy, and Jimmy Jr. In 1955, the nuclear family became complete when Miss Jimmy arrived. And right now, I know because of the tenor of the season and the fact that I'm a former reporter, you're probably going, oh, not even that he's just a former reporter. He's a college professor. How the hell does he know what to do? How can he have the authority to say that? We are not. We make stuff up. I have evidence to corroborate my claims. Let's go back to that picture. See the baby? See the hat? See the neckerchief? See the diaper cover? Thank God Grammy and Mom saved this so I don't have to defend my credentials as much. But don't ask me to put them on. This was my full-scale train set that I got to play on. So when anybody says they have a model train set, I go, big, fat, hairy deal. Mine had 7 steam-powered engines that went up 3 miles up a mountain, gathered 4,000 feet in elevation. It was the first of its kind. It left every hour on the hour, took 1,000 gallons of water, a ton of coal, and over 100 true characters working each summer to run the Cog Railway. And I was there for 14 summers. I am a Cog kid. That's my dad's engine. This is my summer playground. It's the west side of Mount Washington. East side of Mount Washington, I don't care. West side, I do. We lived in Cabin Row, right across from the shops. The base station was up the road. This was where the railroad first got started in 1866, but back in our day, there was the Marshfield station, looked like that. Wambeck was 1 mile up, where the trains would stop to get water. That took the people in 1867 1 year to build, hacking the forest, laying the tracks, and getting up to there. This you've seen in every damn postcard ever. It's Jacob's Ladder. It's the steepest point on the railroad. Skyline, well, that's just where the railroad goes up on the top, and then it takes a right, and then it goes up the cone, and it got to the Summit House, and that is the 3rd Summit House to be built. That's the one I know about. And I know you folks a few years ago heard about Skyline and a hotel, and some people got a little fired up. Well, we had a hotel. I stayed overnight in it with the Bretton Woods Boys Choir. I didn't room with the owner's son because I didn't want to get in trouble. For those of you concerned about the fact that there won't be a hotel, may I offer you the Lake of the Clouds hut, where there is still 80 nice places to bunk if you make reservations, and the AMC is very happy to see you coming. So this is my playground, and we were remote. We were 6 miles from Route 302. There were no telephones. If you wanted to make a call, you had to drive 6 miles to Fabian, find a phone and make the dial. Or you could use a track phone, ring, ring, ring. Summit would answer, you'd give them a message, and they could call out, because on the west side of the mountain they had the telephone line. We were off the grid before it was cool. We had DC power that was generated by a water wheel that had water coming down off the Ammonoosuc and Franklin Brook, which was kind of fun. Well, it wasn't kind of fun, because you couldn't have a TV, you couldn't have an AC radio, you couldn't have an AC record player. You had to have DC everything. Now, the fun part, the pipes that fed the water wheel that generated the power was also where the engines would fill up their tenders after their last trip down. And the Sunset Special would pull into the base about 9 o'clock, let the passengers off, the gift shop was still open and lighted. You know, it's New Hampshire, you gotta sell them a souvenir. And as they filled up the tender, the water pressure dropped to the generator, and the lights would dim. And when the tender was full, they'd shut it off, and a slug of water would go down and hit the generator, the power would go up, and light bulbs would start popping in the gift shop. It was fun. In case you don't know how a Cog Railway works, let's take a brief moment to take a look. The wheels on the outside only make it not tip over. There's no traction, they're just there. All of the power from the cylinders goes into the crankshaft, which is up top, and the crankshaft is geared into this big gear called the spur gear, which generates the power that then allows the cog gear to go into the rack and pull up and come down. Think of your bicycle, take your chain off, run it to wherever you want to go, drop your bike in, pedal there. That's the cog gear. There were two of those, there's two of these. For safety on the way up, there was something called the ratchet, which basically is sort of like one of those sockets that you can't go backwards, and it would be climbing along, and should the engine ever go, it would drop back and you'd only lose about half an inch or so before it would stop. In addition, there were two powerful band brakes on the engine. This axle situation was also in the back. 4 cylinders, all that sort of stuff. The cars are always in front of the engines. The cars are not attached to the engine. The engine has a bumper roller, and the cars have a bumper pad. And it would go up, and that was a safety device, because should the engine go and the ratchet didn't work, and suddenly the engine's hurtling down whatever, there was a ratchet on the car. Stop. In addition, the car had brakes. So on the way down, the brakeman's job was to wind them up just enough to keep the weight of the car off of the engine. That way, if the engine took off, and some did, and brakeman could wind it up and stop the passenger coach before it got into trouble. It had been that way since 1869 when it started. This is where I grew up. That's a birthday, that's another birthday. That was a birthday when I fired my first trip up the mountain. I shoveled a ton of coal, almost gave up on Jacob's Ladder. Dad refused to take the shovel, looked out the window. The fireman cut back on the water going into the boiler to help me build some steam. We made it to the skyline, and it was smooth sailing from there, because it's really easy to go from there to there. So I am a cog kid. There were others. Who were they? Well, that's a cog kid and a tender. That's Claudina Lopez, Beverly Williams. They were there in 1938-41. I talked to both of them. And a Mrs. Archibald McLaren, wrote to the Among the Clouds in 1899 talking about her childhood at the Mount Washington Cog Railway. And it was just like my sister's and mine and Claudina's and Beverly's. She was there in the 1870s. We were there in the 1950s and 60s. It was the same experience. Now, about this operating manual that Dad was supposed to write. The project started while I was shoveling that first complete. The owner of the railway asked Dad to write an operating manual, and the manual would take the knowledge of Mike Boyce, who was Dad's mentor. He'd been there since 1903 when Dad arrived in 1950. And the manual would basically be done on that duplicator that the cog platter did. There was brake, fire, and run, and the cog from a safe point of view. And what that did was told people all of the stuff that brakemen, firemen, and engineers had to do. They were operational guidelines. They were handed out to employees. But exactly how to operate specific trains was left to the cog's oral tradition because each engine was different. This is the number 6, Great Gulf, my dad's train. It's all labeled, it's all in the book, you can figure out more about it. But if you knew how to run the 6, did you know how to run the, I don't know, 2 or 3? I didn't get into many other cabs. I had the best engine on the mountain to play with. So now, after you've learned all that, are you ready for this type of configuration? And that's what the Jitney Years project started out to be, the operating manual, which, as I said, Dad completed on just before he died on May 4th. He didn't know that that was Star Wars Day. The only Star Wars he knew was Reagan's missile shield. But you have to understand that the Cog Railway was cutting-edge technology in 1869. It was just like whatever Elon is doing with SpaceX. Think about it. They were taking a railway to the moon. Elon wants to go to Mars. This was big stuff. And this technology developed right after the Civil War. The cog technology also developed with photographs. So this tourist at the cog, I think, has a little brownie box camera. And she is taking pictures of her intrepid traveling companion who's about to risk his life going all the way to the summit of Mount Washington. There are thousands of these pictures. And usually in the background of all of these pictures are guys who actually ran the railroad. And it suddenly occurred to me that no one has ever written a history of the Cog Railway through the eyes and the lives of the people who work there. And I mean, there's thousands of workers who work there. As they might say in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, who are those guys? Well, I can tell you that that guy is Pat Camden, and he got there in 1872 to start building the second Summit House with his father, John, and Pat used the slide board for 50 summers inspecting the track. And Camden is related to Jitney's mentor, Mike Boyce, and Boyce is the last of several generations of Boyces and Camdens to work at the cog. This guy is a British-born master mechanic, John Horn. He arrives in 1873, and he works at the cog for 38 years. But who are those guys? Now, if you get into my era of the jitney years, I can start to identify folks. I can tell you that you are looking at college kids, the son of a Surgeon General, a Plymouth State student who finished his school teacher training at Linden, several members of the Social Register of the Philadelphia Main Line. Now, from New England mainline railroads came veteran mechanics and boilermakers who came to the cog as steam is phased out and diesel takes over on the traction railroads in the valleys, like Boilermaker Ray Gilman from Lindenville. And to add to the mix of who do you need to run a Cog Railway, you need skilled woodsmen like Monsieur Rouleau. He had little formal education, but advanced degrees and developed in the woods of northern New England. Emile Rouleau and his oxen arrived in 1938 to help build Marshfield Station, and he stays at the Cog for over 40 years. They worked 7 days a week, 80 hours a week, and that was if everything went well. If it didn't go well, you had more hours. Consequently, in August, things began to get a little ugly. There was a grumpy club. The grumpiest would be elected president. To alleviate that, the owner at the time, Colonel Arthur Simpson Teague on the left, and his wife, Ellen Crawford Teague, decided to throw a cog party to let off a little steam. Some of you, or if you're into horses, may know Cass White. He was into horses in Lancaster. Well, the deal was that the schedule would end early so the train crews could be off the mountain. The folks who worked at the summit could come down. There would be a barbecue catered so that the kitchen staff didn't have to cook. The employees would kick in $2 each to lubricate the evening with, well, alcohol. And remember, we're way out in the boondocks. And so you needed to entertain yourself. Ann Teague, Ginger Nye, Ken Christie, Batty Landreth, Pliny Granger III doing a kick line. There's a relative of one of those kick line persons in attendance this evening. Dun, 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 dun. Coggers walk amongst you. We had Elvira Murdoch. She came from Germany as a child prodigy on the trumpet. She played in those all-girls orchestras until she was in her 30s. Who knew they were girls were that old? She taught Charlie Teague, the youngest child of Arthur Simpson Teague, how to play the trumpet, and his older sister Lucy was very supportive, and we clapped appropriately. The Cog wives would get together and sing barbershop and other songs to entertain the folks. There was a master of ceremonies for this event, which was my dad, Jimmy. He wanted to sing desperately, but couldn't. He did, however, write parodies.
To the tables down at Morey's, to the place where Louis dwells, to the dear old temple bar we love so well. Sing the whiffin' coops assembled with their glasses raised on high, and the magic of their singing cast its spell.
Yes, the magic of their singing, of the songs we love so well. Shall I wasting them avoid and the rest? We will serenade idly while life and voice shall last. Then we'll pass and be forgotten with the rest.
And because Dad couldn't sing, my sister and I had to handle it. Now, that gives you a brief overview of the Cog operations. But you didn't come here tonight to hear that. You wanted to hear about hometown heroes who were on the mountain. And my friends, I've got 36 folks. Okay? Which means we may not get to the a la carte menu. When you sat down, there's an a la carte menu. I like to give the audiences choices of where to go, what else they might like to learn about. I have a feeling we're not going to get there, but you can tell the way I pitch it that I've obviously been spending too much time watching the Food Network. All right. 1 year after this lithograph was published, Mrs. Hennessy of Lisbon provided my first mystery about this town. The Littleton Courier says in August 1884 that Mrs. W.K. Hennessy has gone up to Mount Washington to assist Mrs. Fitzgerald at the hotel. Or actually, to assist Mrs. Howland in the hotel. And we're pretty sure that Mrs. Howland is the longtime Summit House pastry chef, Mary Alice Fitzgerald, who then married the Crawford House Concord coach driver, George D. Howland. I don't have any pictures yet of either of them, but thank God for findagrave.com, I've got where they're planted. Now, Mrs. W.K. Hennessy has gone to Mount Washington. But then in October, the Courier says Mrs. M.K. Hennessy has returned to Lisbon from Mount Washington. If the initials W.K. are correct, then it might be Rockland, Maine native Annie Thurlow, who married William K. Hennessy, and she might be the assistant. But more likely, it is the tailoress, Ella A. Bowers Hennessy, who was married to William and Annie's son, Moses. Moses Hennessy's home was in Lisbon. Help, please. I know none of you were probably alive at the time, but Lord knows you might be related to him. All right. In 1907, the Littleton Courier's Lisbon note says that Oscar Clark, Ray McAlpin, Jack Gilligan, and Mabel Wilson have gone to the Summit House, Mount Washington, to work for the remainder of the season. All I have at this point is Jack Gilligan's name and a suspicion that Miss Mabel Wilson may have been a school teacher, so help. Now, the Courier went on to say that Oscar Clark, who went to this house recently as a bellboy, has been obliged to return home on account of the ill effects of the high altitude on his heart. Clark's heart would outlast his first wife and not actually fail until 1974. Clark's classmate at the Summit House was Ray McAlpin, who would finish the season but only had 5 months left in his life. Clark and McAlpin were part of the senior play, both sporting aging makeup, and thanks to your historical society, we have images of these two young coggers. And Ray was the 19-year-old son of a Lisbon farmer. 5 months after he returned to Washington, Ray McAlpin would fall sick with typhoid fever. The only child of William and Julia McAlpin died on March 19th, 1908. Now, we know that Isabel Cogswell was a teacher. She went to Plymouth Normal School and in the fall of 1908 earned a whopping $28 a month for the 10-week session at the Week School in Bath. In 1924, Isabel married a Southern Pacific Railroad yardmaster. They moved west. She died in 1974 in El Paso, Texas at the age of 84. There are more Lisbon cockers in need of pictures from the summer of 1959. Edward Gates was a fireman and grandson of a prominent Lisbon man, Edward Everett Gates. During World War II, Ed Gates served at an engineer's unit, suffered a non-combat injury in February 45. He started at the Cog in late June 1959 and was let go at the end of July when he did not report for work. Apparently, Gates had gone on a drinking spree with two other coggers, 32-year-old Jerry Smith from Lisbon and 29-year-old Carmi LaFave from Swanton, Vermont. Gates reportedly stole Smith's car, headed for Albany, New York. When police showed up at the base station to investigate on August 1st, Gates, and Smith's time at the Cog, for some reason, came to an end. Also in 1959, Hank Varney was 23. His single mom, Ava Parent Varney, had worked as a painter in the Lisbon peg mill to raise her 2 kids. Hank had found work and love in the tourist trade. Hank was a 20-year-old hotel houseman in Twin Mountain when he married a 23-year-old West Virginia chambermaid in 1956. Their first child lived only 3 days in 1958. He only spent 1 season, 1959, at the Cog. Sarah P. Foster worked 2 summers while going to Bates College. In 1959, she earned $120 a month as a Summit House waitress. The 18-year-old daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Harold C. Foster made a television weathercast appearance on her 19th birthday from the Summit. She started the 1960 summer working at the tramway, but finished the season back at the Summit House. Unfortunately, I could find no contemporary picture of Sarah until she died in 2009. Well, we met the Lisbon Summit House kitchen team for 1884, Mrs. Hennessy and Mrs. Howland. The next Lisbonite to arrive at the Summit was the son of a Lisbon clothier, George Brummer. The first son was 18-year-old G. Conrad Brummer, went to work as a bellboy at the Summit. In 1885, Con Brunner would return to Lisbon, then join his father's business, and would run the clothing store until 1937 with the other cogger in the family, brother Carl J. Brummer. Carl went to the Summit House in 1891 at 17 to work at the hotel's night watchman, while his brother, Con, became involved in Democratic politics. Carl was a musician as well as a clothing store operator. Carl Brummer was not the only Lisbon cogger on top of the Mount Washington. In 1891, 16-year-old Josephine Lunette Atwood was a twin whose sister Jenny had died just 23 days after their birth in 1875. After her summer at the Summit House, she would start working at the post office and would become the assistant postmistress in Lisbon. At 28, Josephine became the wife of Dr. Ernest Cleesby, one of Littleton's most popular and estimable young men. The wedding of the popular young couple was front page news in the Courier. 1891 was the second summer at the Summit dining room for 21-year-old Carl Moore. In August 1890, he was part of the unsuccessful search for violinist Ewald Weiss. That Boston musician was part of the Summit House Orchestra. He packed a lunch for an afternoon hike, disappeared. His body was never found. So far, Carl Moore's picture has not yet been found, but his gravestone can be found in the Grove Hills Cemetery if you want to go see it. 18-year-old Leslie G. Pennock went to work at the Summit House in 1899, and I have found a picture, thanks to the Historical Society, of Leslie. Unfortunately, it's in grade school. 1899 was the first of 4 seasons working on the top of Mount Washington. His last summer of 1902 was as a bellboy. The newspaper reporting on his return to town the first summer said, quote, "He has many interesting adventures to recount." Unfortunately, the reporter did not put any of those adventures in the paper. The fiery destruction of the second summer house in 1909 cut the mountaintop workforce to a skeleton crew hosting visitors at the Tip Top House. The fire had destroyed the Among the Clouds newspaper office. The Tip Top was only saved because of a fire break cut in the ramp and the fact that the wind was blowing away from the Tip Top House. It also destroyed a new engine house, the stage office, the signal station. The railroad was rebuilt, but it wasn't until 1915, because they were arguing over what type of hotels that you want. And there's a tabletop display over there about the really cool one, which would have taken the Cog Railway away, substituted an electric trolley that would run 22 miles across the entire western face of the Presidential, all the way to Among the Clouds, circle around the top of the mountain 3 times before coming to a brand new hotel, all electric, concrete and steel, built around the top of the mountain so that visitors could step out onto the balconies from their rooms and look down on the top of the summit and get a, I don't know, something like 280-degree view through the windows. There was going to be an electric searchlight. It was going to be cool. And if they built it, it would have been totally lit and nobody this time would give a crap about Lizzie's station. But I digress. It took them until 1915 to get a design. And a Lisbon contractor, S.D. Morgan, or Sylvanus D. Morgan, got the job. And he put together the hotel rather quickly because he prefabricated a lot of the parts and then just brought them up and planted them. He also did the work with this crew. Are there any Lisbon people that you see in that picture? If there are, let me know. So, August, Lisbon teen, J. Arthur Hollenbeck, 16 years old. His dad, George, was the foreman at the glove factory in town here. Jacob Arthur Hollenbeck would become a machinist. He died in Connecticut in 1885 at the age of 85. But in 1915, Arthur got to work in a brand new cafe in the back portion over there. And this Summit House was the one that we played at and knew well during the Jitney years. Edward Cox reported for work at the Summit in late June 1922. Son of Lucy Valley and Fred Cox would become a tinsmith and later a sheet metal worker in the Boston Navy Yard. His stone is actually in Springfield, Massachusetts. Isabel Clough's stone is here in town at the Grove Hill Cemetery. While I have no pictures of her, a 1989 article about the 82-year-old in the Mount Washington Observatory News Bulletin had details about her hiring in 1925. Allie Wright of Manchester, New Hampshire was manager of the Summit House then, said Clough, and his wife ran the gift shop. He called a friend who was a tailor in Lisbon and told him he needed a waitress. Mr. Brummer called, called Isabel, and she agreed, I agreed to help out. I went up on the 3rd of July. Mr. Wright looked at me and said he didn't see how he could use me because I was too fat to wait on tables. He kept me though and put me to work on the counters for a while. By hiking, working, and eating food that was not Mom's cooking, I lost a lot of weight and he finally let me wait on tables. In fact, Clough kept working at the Summit House for another 5 seasons. Anybody related to Isabel? I really could use a picture of this friendly waitress. Good stuff. All right, well, let's move to 1938, or somewhere in that neighborhood. Born in Bath, 20-year-old Robert Santee was a cabinet maker and rebuilt 3 Cog Railway cars for Mount Washington, but I'm not exactly sure what year he might have done it because the Cog in the 30s was modifying its coaches from the 1904 40-passenger model. And how can you tell? Count up the number of windows times 4. In the 34, they figured out they could put a baggage holding place at the back of it. And then in 1938, the Superliner came out. 48 passengers, how can you tell? Count up the windows. Multiply by 4. You can't do that now, but that's another whole story that we can't get into. Robert Santee later designed and he built the interior of the original Cannon Mountain Summit House and the interior of the Flume Gift Shop. He was definitely a cabinet maker. There's also a gravestone for Roy Fulford, who went up to the Cog in 1950 with his younger brother Leon. And once again, your Historical Society came through with a picture. Yay! The boy's widowed mother, Zelma Aiken Fulford, had married Pliny Granger Sr., and that brought the Fulfords into the Cog family, as Pliny is just the tip of a very large iceberg of Grangers that spanned 4 generations at Cog. I can't get into that. It gets too weird. Just know that if you have a picture of Roy, I'm looking for it. Kurt Wright was originally from Maine, graduated from Thornton Academy in 1949. At Thornton, according to his yearbook, Kurt was also known as Redskin, Indian, Chief Lazybones. His classmates said he had, quote, sparkling brown eyes, dark wavy hair, likes women, but never gives the Thornton girls a break. He's an ace in all of gym classes and a 5-year man. He was living in Lisbon his second summer at the Cog when he was driving in Littleton, making a turn onto Saranac Street when he hit a 13-year-old girl on a bicycle, breaking her leg. He was charged with reckless driving. Lisbon machinist Bill Livingston and his wife Clementina, I only knew them as Mr. Livingston and Mrs. Livingston, worked at the Cog for 13 seasons. My dad loved to consume beverages and listen to the Scottish machinist tell stories. And the one that Dad always talked about was when Bill Livingston taught Dad how proper etiquette for Scottish drinking. And as I understand it, when you're passing a bottle around, you take the bottle and you only drink down to where your hand is. And Bill told my dad, and that's why whenever I take the bottle, so if you've got any good stories from Bill and Clement, dig in. All right, Roger LeBaire. 31-year-old Roger LeBaire spent a short time on the track crew in 1960. He started on June 2nd. On July 6th, a Grafton County deputy sheriff served the railroad paperwork seeking $150 of his salary. The Cog withheld $59.64, and he was let go on July 8th. Again, if anybody's related, sorry, it's in the public record. 25-year-old Ray Locke was a shop helper in 1975. He graduated from St. Johnsbury Trade School in 71, and that is about all I've got. Help? I found Ken Hudson's name on an undated list of what appears to be former Cog employees. I believe he was a carpenter who worked for a time for the owner at the time, Joel Bador. A question mark has appeared next to his name, grouped with a Robert Hudson, Jennifer Hudson, Melanie Hudson. Now, there was a fireman named Kenny on the 1987 weekly employee schedule. However, there are 2 Kennys on the 1987 list. If you've got any information, now we're getting up to the point where some of you were alive, and you might know Kenny. So please let me know. When I say coggers walk amongst you, I am not kidding. Dan Coy of Lisbon spent one summer working in Marshfield at the Cog Railway. The son of Paul Coy says he used to receive care packages from his family, and one featured cookies that he brought down to the boarding house to share with colleagues who were bunking there. For some reason, the cookies got left outside overnight, and Dan says the next morning there was nothing left but an empty wrapper, as the cookies had been consumed by a fox that frequented the facility and many times got a handout from the workers. last but not least, I think, David Page. I know he was assistant postmaster at the summit in 2009, filled in for Walter Mitchell, but that's it. I heard rumors he might be here tonight. If you'd like to tell me more about his time at the Cog, I'm all ears. Up to this point, the Lisbon Coggers have been workers, but your town has a corporate director, an investor, and an owner. Herbert Moulton was a director of the Mount Washington Railroad from 1909 to 1919. Moulton was a stockholder and director of the Parker Young Company plant in Lisbon, subsequently was elected treasurer and general manager. Parker Young manufactured piano sounding boards, house finish, bookshelves, and other wood products. His obituary in the Littleton Courier said he was, quote, one of the wealthiest men in northern New Hampshire, and yet no picture. 1947, Lisbon High School graduate Lester Wild Bill Presby became an investor in the Mount Washington Cog Railway in 1985 when he helped bankroll his son and Joel Bedore to buy out their two partners, John Raleigh and Loxley Ness. Wild Bill was a heavy equipment operator. He was one of the first people in the area to own the first bulldozer and later a backhoe. Wild Bill became Bunker Bill in 1985, and of course Wayne Presby continues to own the place. We've now reached the a la carte menu. I think I have 6 minutes, which means I'm going to have to leave you hungry for more. But suffice it to say, Sylvester Marsh's story is fun. One of his attorneys when he was in Chicago was some guy named Abraham Lincoln. Walter Aiken was cool for this reporter because he literally shot himself in the foot and died. Yeah, you don't get that. You know. Colonel Henry Teague was a Dartmouth College graduate, the first Dartmouth Tuck School graduate, ran hotels, went bankrupt in Florida, and that made him the perfect man for Boston and Maine to take over the Cog Railway in 1931. Arthur S. Teague was the most decorated World War II soldier in New Hampshire. A hero's journey. Pepper Sass wasn't Pepper Sass when he growed up. His name was Hero. That's all I'll say on that. The Devil's Shingle. That's the slide board. That's the piece of wood about this big. Strap it onto the cog rail. 2 handles. Lift it up. Slide home from work faster than waiting to go down on the train. The 3-mile trip. The record time for the 3-mile trip from the summit to the base was 2 minutes, 45 seconds. So that means in the late 1880s and 90s, guys on boards, 60 miles an hour, down and sparks flying. They'd come down in the middle of the night with the Among the Clouds coverage of the various coach parades in Bethlehem and other places to get them to the morning hotels in time for all the people to read their names in the paper from the day before. There's some good stuff. And people died. Oh, sorry. Calm down, Tim. You're no longer a reporter. You're not supposed to. The deal was, people died. And I got a story that said, here's this guy who died, and all they said was he was a Frenchman. He was a Quebecois. And then one paper said, well, his name is George Tricott. And I'm going, if he's a Frenchman from Canada, George Tricott is not his name. It turned out to be Eleazar Turcotte. And I found out about it, along with all the other people who died on the slide board. There were other cog railroads, one in Maine on Mount Desert Island, one at Pikes Peak, Colorado that's still operating as diesel. but there could have been more. Owl's Head almost had one, but I digress. 6% solution, that's the electric trolley. Glass ceiling shattered in 1895. The Summit House was actually run by a woman. The shining light, they put in an electric searchlight. They were going to offer people to have artificial moonlight for late night picnics anywhere from that could be seen from the top of the mountain. Other cod parties, oh yeah, they got really good. We had a brakeman who may have been a spy. We know he was OSS trained, but what did he do later? I got the story. Cog American, this is where I wanted to talk about the fact that this was such a diverse group of people who came together with one mission: to get the tourists safely from down here, up there, and back. And it was people from Philadelphia Main Line, it was Southern college kids, it was school teachers who had the summer off and needed some more money, it was these woodsmen who could stay late in the fall and run the trains, it was old engineer and locomotive types from down in the valley. I know we didn't have very many African Americans, I've only found 3. But we were, in some ways, the melting pot, thanks to those Quebecois. Because the Frenchmen were just, and boy, if you were an English-speaking Canadian, you were above them. Again, I've had fun going back and looking at our history. If you're the nephew of the owner or manager, you can actually use a steam engine to get an MIT degree. I've got the guy's thesis. First, hello, it's me, that's the first telephone that came. Lizzie Station, well, enough of that. So let's, because I now have 7 seconds, let's hit the, oh, it didn't hit the end. Just a second. I can do this, really. I'm a trained professional. Really? Yes, I am. As you see, I have to bring my cursor up onto the screen and then click it. And I can talk about 1967. 1967 was the last year that the jitneys were going to be at the Cog Railway. Dad got a 12-month contract, and that meant next summer we couldn't come back. 1967 also turned out to be the horrible year for anyone who was working at the Cog that summer. 1967 didn't start out too bad. It was Ellen and Arthur's 25th anniversary, and they did a tour of Europe. And Ellen, who was mainline Philadelphia, was very excited about the fact that Arthur, having won the second highest English award for valor on D-Day, which happened to be their anniversary. When you guys are thinking about a present for your spouse, liberating Europe, I don't think you can do that well. And the deal is that because he won that award, he could visit the House of Lords, and Lord knows a Philadelphia debutante certainly enjoys the House of Lords. They came back and Arthur resumed the balancing act of, with the money you had, how much could you invest in the Cog? How much did you need to keep your wife and daughters in the debutante lifestyle of Philadelphia? And he'd managed that for quite some time. But in 1967, he returns from Europe to find out that the state of New Hampshire, which now owned the Summit House, had failed to do proper renovations. And in addition, the water supply water tank behind the Summit House had blown down in a storm. What that meant was no longer could they offer overnight accommodations to tourists. Deposits had been made all winter for this special package deal. Go up at 6 o'clock on the sunset special. Stay overnight. Get up to see the morning sunrise if the weather is good. And then take the train back down. I think the total price was $12. Deposits had been made because they couldn't offer it, and the Summit House was not fit for accommodations. All of that had to be sent back. Arthur had a heart attack. He was out until late July. He returned and attended a railway board of directors meeting on August 4th. And Ellen Teague writes, Art attended the meeting but disagreed with so many of their, Middleton is the lawyer and Poltrack is the accountant's decisions, that the meeting was adjourned. Ellen, the accountant, and the lawyer went to the Teague family farm in Guildhall to get some vegetables. Arthur went back to the cabin that the Teagues were staying in that summer. This was originally the Peppersass house. It was up at Marshfield. It was built so that after the Peppersass crashed in 1929, they stuck it in there so that tourists wouldn't steal stuff off of the famous engine. It eventually went back out after 1939's World Fair appearance, and they converted this into employee housing. The reason the Teagues were there in 1967 was because on the hut, which was originally built by Colonel Henry Teague, and then expanded in 1946 to take care of all the Teague children, and there were a herd of Teague children. On October 1985, it burned. It contained much memorabilia that was being gathered for the 100th anniversary in 1969. Arthur went back to the house. He shot himself. His youngest daughter, Lucy Teague, found his body. A stone was brought down from the top of the mountain and was made into a gravestone for Arthur. 2 weeks to the day, it was important to get back to normal. The Teague girls rode in horse shows, and there was a horse show in Keene, New Hampshire they wanted to get to. Anne Teague and her boyfriend, Norm Coop, were going to drive down. Anne showed Norm Coop, son of C. Everett Coop. I don't know if you remember. Get your rubbers on. Yeah, okay. That's his son. Dated Arthur Teague's daughter. And she worked in the gift shop all day, he worked on the mountain all day. And after dinner, my sister joined Lucy, because they'd been working on saddle soaking the tack all day. And after dinner, they loaded Lady Rouge, which was Anne's horse, and they loaded Lucy's Black Magic. And they left the Cog somewhere around 10 o'clock, heading for Keene. On Interstate 93, just before the Tilton exit at Bridge 52, Lucy and my sister were sleeping in the back of the truck. The hitch comes off the ball. Everything rolls into the ditch. My sister went out the back of the vehicle, landed in between the trailer and the van. Lucy went out the side window. The van rolled over her, killing her. Lady Rouge was trapped in the trailer. A state police officer put her down. My sister remembers the gunshot. Lucy's horse, Black Magic, was also destroyed. And Lucy joining Father in the Lancaster Cemetery. Annus horribilis, but it got worse. September 17th, 1967, the first time any paying passengers on the railroad died. At the switch at Skyline, there were 4 or 5 coggers in the cab, but none looked to see whether or not there were 5 clear channels to pass through. Nobody saw that rail across the cog rack. It was the perfect derailleur. The cog gear hit there, went over, dropped. The next one came down, hit, pulled over. The spur gear, which is really big, climbed up onto that part of the switch, and the engine tipped off. The car did the same thing. Boom, chomp, boom, chomp. No spur gear on the car. It stayed on the track. It was overloaded with over 80 people on board, standing room only, and it took off. It was a 7-ton sled with no brakes. It got to a point where a rail broke, it came off on the low part of the trestle, it slid for a while, it hit a rock. People died. They were remembered in the Carroll Town Report that year. It came from all over. Carroll Town Report, birth, death, vital stats, also remembered Arthur and Lucy. But life does go on. Annus horribilis ended with Arthur and Ellen's second oldest daughter marrying Thomas Sticky Baker from Littleton in Concord. My friends tell me, geez, Tim, why do you do this? Why do you tell such sad stuff? I said, I tell stories about life because the Mount Washington Cog Railway in New Hampshire is no prissy, polite, laundered Disneyland-style operation. It's gutsy, sooty, elemental experience. It was conceived in the 1850s, a less fastidious time and age than our own. And this New York Times reporter said, P.T. Barnum once called the Cog Railway the second greatest show on earth, and so it remains. That's wrong. P.T. Barnum called Mount Washington the second greatest show on earth. But as you all know, in promotion of tourist industries, over time, it was sort of close. So, yeah. So why do I do it this way? I believe that the tragedy and triumph, the good times, the bad times, the swearing, the melting pot, all of that was a community that raised me. It may take a village to raise a child. It was a Cog Railroad that raised me. been here so long. All right, if there's no questions, remember, I was a professor, so you need to read more about it. Don't just trust me. F. Allen Burt's Story of Mount Washington, Killer's Railway to the Moon, Ellen Teague's version, 1982, Conquered by Mountain, Donald F. Bray, 1984, Jonathan Hively still selling books, and Joe McQuaid, you maybe remember, ran the Manchester Union Leader. He's a cogger too. I've got stories. Yes?
I just want to mention S.D. Morgan, who built the Summit House, and he put together the petitions in the barn in his house on Highland Avenue, which is across from the school. And he sent it from the train here to Fabian's and then up. But he also built this building.
Cool.
What are the volumes that you gave to our society?
Okay, when the lights come back up, I have two tabletop models. The tabletop models have the printouts that I did in 2018. That is what I have given to the Historical Society if you want to look at it.
Sir.
Yes?
Observation. There was a guy, Leonard Stevens, who grew up in Lisbon, graduated from Lisbon High School, and he wrote about 15 books. One of the titles of the books is Old Pepper Sash, The Locomotive and Climbed Mount Washington, published in 1959.
I've got my copy that was signed by him, and I've talked, he never worked at the Cog, but his son did, and I've talked with his son. So if you want to find out what Leonard Stevens' kid did when he ran off to the circus, I've got that story. And if you look in his book, he's got an image in there where he's got the train going the wrong way on the mountain, where the coach is ahead of the engine's pointed downhill, and it's at the water tank that didn't last to the 20th century. One other thing, just because I'm a reporter, and you guys are starting to use artificial intelligence, and it's going to be very strange when you look, because even the pictures you see, you can't believe. The cover of my railway roster, I did for fun. Why? I had Photoshop. Because the woman in the cab wouldn't have been there when the guy from 1869 was the engineer. She's now a intensive care nurse in Boston, etc. Other fun facts. Photographers take a lot of stuff from the same angle. That's why I was able to put the 1870s train and track in front of the 1906 to 1990s Cog coach and put a brakeman from the 1870s on the back platform. Why do I tell you this? I've had a historical society that will not be named say, "We've never seen that picture before." And I went, there's a reason. So what I want you guys to do is trust, but verify, and don't believe everything you see, because there are deep fakes. How deep? You go to my timeline booklet, that's a 2000 diesel climbing out of an 1894 depot that burned in 1895, alongside Marshfield, which still exists, and I'm just saying, there may be people out there who won't admit it. Now, I've got PDFs at the Yin Yang. I'm going to have, in the next 2 weeks, there will be 6 PDFs, there are currently 5, available for download. Coggers of Mount Washington, newhampshire.org. I've got business cards. It's free, go there. You can look through the database, you can do vanity searches, you can see if Uncle Ralph's name got there or whatever. Contact me. at my latest email address, because I started this all from what used to be Linden State College, but I'm now ending at the university that formerly was Linden State College, blah, blah, blah. So thank you for your attention. Thanks you for your patience. Looks like I went 15 over. Damn, they never let that happen
I
to
didn't know
TV.
you had a time limit.
Oh, you guys said the business meeting was gonna be at 6:30. The show started at 7.
But we don't need those things.
Remember, you're talking to an old TV recorder, and when the window closed, it closed hard.
If people have to, I mean, people might want to leave, but and you might want to leave, but.
No, I'm
Well,
thrilled people are interested.
if you haven't seen the museum, we're happy to let you wander through if you haven't seen our museum.
But if people have questions, we're not in a hurry to, it's been delightful. Really good.
Cool.